I want to talk a little bit about belief and doubt in Dracula, and these two entities are at odds with each other. They correspond to science and mysticism. Oops, I should make them parallel. Let's do it this way. Sorry, mysticism. My bad. Mysticism versus science. Make it a little more accurate. Okay. So the struggle in Dracula is to deal with impossibilities. Dracula is both dead and alive, masculine and feminine, and impossibility is the name of the game as the men in particular try to figure out what is wrong with Lucy. The cluster of men, the children of light, so Quincy and Seward and Arthur and Jonathan, are all lower in the pecking order of the pack. The point about Van Helsing is he is the beta male. The alpha male is the top dog. And in this whole entity with Dracula and all of the male characters, Van Helsing is second strongest, at least until the end of it where he triumphs over Dracula. However, among the men themselves, excluding Dracula, Van Helsing is the leader. He's the most powerful of them all. And without him, their empiricism is useless, basically, impotent and unable to solve the problem. Van Helsing combines science and mysticism together, and that is what his strength is. He's not in a world of belief and mysticism and religion only, and not only, and also conversely, not functioning in a world of science and doubt and empiricism either. He straddles both worlds. And you can look it up yourself early in chapter 1, but as Harker makes his way further into the Carpathians, he encounters all of these people with religious superstitions, and he says things like, when the old lady gives him a rosary, he says, whether it was the old lady's fear or the many ghostly traditions of the place or the crucifix itself, I do not know, but I am not feeling nearly as easy in my mind as usual. And so that journey into the Carpathian Mountains brings him more and more into a state of doubt and discomfort, and his rational world gets dissembled and taken apart. By the time he's back in London, he's returned again to his mental state. One final thing I want to layer in here before I actually talk about these passages is the state of belief and mysticism belong more naturally to so-called primitive or folk societies because they are vulnerable to nature and they remain constantly aware of their own human weakness in the natural world. The qualities of doubt and science belong more to what I would call the civilized world, what we would call rationalized society, industrial capitalism, mercantile capitalism, corporate capitalism, the adult world that we know. And as these characters struggle to solve the problem of how to get rid of Dracula, these ideas come in conflict. You should note also that I did say that Frankenstein was one of the first science fiction novels, and I would argue that Dracula is in the genre of the detective novel because it really is a problem that they have to solve. It's not, a lot of detective novels don't have this supernatural element in it, but in the sense that it is an invasion or an intrusion and ultimately the death of Lucy that they have to investigate, it does function like a detective novel where these characters have to piece together clues in order to solve the problem. So Van Helsing seems to be the only one who understands what is happening. And I want to go to chapter 14. There is a diary entry on the 26th of September from Seward's diary. And it's about, I'm going to say, halfway in to that entry. There's a long speech by Van Helsing that really sort of brings everything together. And it starts right here. This is Van Helsing talking to Jonathan. He says, you know, you are a clever man, John. You reason well, and your wit is bold, but you are too prejudiced. You do not let your eyes nor your ears hear that which is outside your daily life is of no account to you. So Van Helsing has a kind of sixth sense, or an ability to perceive things beyond the ordinary. And this business about ears and so on, I think, is a sideways allusion to empiricism and the pursuit of data and information. Van Helsing continues, do not think there are things which you cannot understand. It's very reminiscent of Horatio to Hamlet. There are things in this world, good Horatio, that that extend beyond our knowledge, and yet which are. So just because you can't understand them doesn't mean that they don't exist, and that some people see things that others cannot. But there are things old in you which must not be contemplated. This is Van Helsing's bad English, instead of contemplated, by men's eyes, because they know or think they know some things which other men have told them. The fault of our science, and there it is that it wants to explain all. And if it explain not, then it says there is nothing to explain. So science is binary. If it doesn't fit inside the categories, it doesn't exist. And you can go back and look at our discussions on Thomas Kuhn and the structure of scientific revolutions and all of that about how science works. Continuing a little further down, see if I can find this very quickly. He says, still in the same section, let me tell you today, my friend, there are things done today in electrical science which would have been deemed unholy by the very men who discovered electricity. That sounds a little bit like Dr. Frankenstein transcending the limitations of science and law. And in earlier times would have been burned as wizards. There are always mysteries in life. And so Van Helsing goes on to talk about Methuselah, who lived 900 years, Old Testament, and so on, and to point to historical impossibilities and so on. Finally, down here, here, can you tell me why in the Pampas and elsewhere there are bats that come at night and open the veins of cattle and horses and suck dry their veins? How in some islands of the western seas there are bats which hang on the trees all day, and those which have seen described as like giant nuts or pods, that when sailors sleep on the deck because that is hot, flit down on them, and then in the morning are found dead, white, even as Miss Lucy was. Good God, Professor, I said, starting up. Do you mean to tell me that Lucy was bitten by such a bat, that such a thing here in London in the 19th century? Impossible, of course, that it would happen to here. And London and England, of course, represent in this novel all kinds of rationality. And here is the core of it, Van Helsing. I will tell you, my thesis is this. I want you to believe, Arthur. Believe what? To believe in things you cannot. And that is the profound obstacle that blocks these other men from solving the mystery of Dracula. Van Helsing is able to combine science and mysticism to get to it. And so he's not blinded by the prejudicial bias of civilized society and its science and its rationality. And at the same time, he is not limited by the primitive mysticism or naivete of belief in things supernatural without balancing it to bring it to some kind of equilibrium. So that is the core. I'll take you to one more passage. I'll find this right away. It is chapter 18, and the date of the diary entry is the second one on the 30th of September. It's Mina's journal, and says this. I'll find the passage here for you. Here we are. For in this enlightened age, when men believe not even what they see, the doubting of wise men would be his greatest strength. So Van Helsing says, isn't it ironic that the advancement of civilization has gone so far and the progress of science has gone so far that we've achieved so many things in terms of discovery and so on, and yet even when the evidence is right in front of us, the scientific evidence of a mystical existence, and this is the whole paradox of Dracula. How can you have scientific proof for something that is mystical? But there it is. This kind of inability to believe and see is striking to Van Helsing. And so he says the doubting of wise men would be his greatest strength. The people you should be, where your doubt should be going is not into mysticism and whether the supernatural exists or not, but you should be doubting the biases of science and rationality and law that are blind to the existence of all of these things under our nose. Once they are able to, these children of light, once they are able to fuse together their knowledge of mysticism and science, the problem of Dracula is basically solved.